My name is Claire Dawson. I'm 28 years old, an interior designer living in Spokane, Washington. I still remember that night as if the air itself had cracked open. At first, it was nothing more than another family dinner. The smell of pot roast drifting from the kitchen, the faint rattle of ice in my father's glass, my mother fussing with the serving spoons. I even laughed about a client's absurd request for zebra-striped curtains. For a moment, life felt ordinary. But ordinary has a cruel way of shattering. My father's hand came down hard against the table, the sound sharp enough to silence my laugh mid-sentence. Forks froze, glasses trembled. His eyes, stern and unblinking, locked on mine as though the verdict had already been written. "You have 2 days to pack your things and get out. This house belongs to your brother now." The words didn't just land in the room, they hollowed it out. I felt the blood drain from my face. My fork hung suspended halfway to my mouth, as though even gravity had forgotten me. My mother kept her gaze on the napkin in her lap, folding and unfolding it like a secret she couldn't bear to share. The silence that followed was worse than shouting. It was the sound of something breaking in me. My brother Ethan wasn't even there. He hadn't been for years. He was the one who left, first for college, then for bigger dreams in New York. Phone calls twice a year, empty promises to visit, stories of success that never seemed to materialize. And yet, in this very dining room that I had rebuilt with my own hands, my father was handing him everything. I looked around, the reality slicing deeper. The chandelier above us I had chosen and installed, the hardwood floors I had refinished on my knees until dawn, the sturdy oak table itself, polished by me. Every corner whispered my sacrifices, and now I was the intruder in the home I had preserved. My throat burned, but no words came. Maybe part of me knew that arguing would only feed their certainty. My father leaned back in his chair, arms crossed like a man convinced his judgment was final. My mother shifted, but still said nothing. So I did the only thing I could. I pushed my plate away, rose from my chair, and walked out. The scrape of wood against wood echoed like a closing door. My legs carried me down the hallway, but my mind was racing with one realization, one I hadn't dared put into words until that moment. They believed I would bend, that I would pack up, disappear quietly, and leave the life I had poured into this house behind. But they had underestimated me, and that would be their first mistake. That night, lying awake in my old bedroom, I stared at the pale blue ceiling I had painted 3 summers earlier. The words still echoed in my ears. 2 days to get your stuff out. But instead of breaking me, they pulled me back through time, through every choice I had made that tethered me to this house. 3 years ago, the house was crumbling. The roof leaked every spring, the wood floors buckled in the heat, and the bank was circling like a vulture. My parents owed more than $60,000 in loans they couldn't pay. I was 25 then, still young in my career, barely finding steady clients. Every penny I had saved was meant for my own future, maybe a down payment on a small condo, a place that was truly mine. But when the foreclosure notice arrived, it wasn't Ethan who picked up the phone. He was too busy, too far, too untouchable. It was me who stood in the kitchen, listening to my father's voice crack under the weight of failure, and my mother's eyes red from crying. It was me who opened my savings account and drained it dry. $60,000, every cent I had earned from sleepless nights drafting designs for clients, from painting apartments for landlords who barely thanked me, from lugging furniture in and out of places that weren't my own. I handed it to the bank without hesitation, because this house wasn't just lumber and shingles. It was my childhood. It was Sunday breakfasts with scrambled eggs, the spot on the living room floor where I first sketched furniture layouts, the front porch where I dreamed about my future. And after that money left my hands, I didn't stop. The house needed more. I picked up extra clients, worked weekends, and poured every ounce of energy into restoring what my parents could no longer manage. I painted the walls in calming colors, soft creams in the hallway, sage green in the kitchen, that pale blue ceiling in my room. I refinished the floors until they gleamed under the afternoon sun. When the old washing machine broke, I bought a new one with my own credit card, hauling laundry baskets up and down until the delivery arrived. Piece by piece, I rebuilt their world. And through it all, Ethan's shadow hung over me. My brother, the golden child, the success story. He had left Spokane 5 years earlier with promises of skyscrapers and Wall Street victories. He called twice a year, his voice hurried, painting grand pictures of deals and promotions. My parents ate up every word. "Ethan is doing so well," my mother would say on the phone to her sister, while I scrubbed dishes in the very sink I had paid to replace. "He's going places," my father would brag to neighbors, nodding proudly, while I was on my knees sanding floors. It stung, but I swallowed it. I told myself my work spoke louder than their words. When they looked at Ethan, they saw a shining future. When they looked at me, they saw stability. Silent, dependable, invisible. Last summer, I redid the dining room where we had sat the night of my father's ultimatum. I installed a modern chandelier, replacing the flickering light from my childhood. I spent hours sanding, painting, adjusting until it was perfect. My mother smiled, called it elegant. My father muttered that it looked nice. And a week later, Ethan called with another grand story, and they spent an hour on the phone gushing while I stood in the hallway, paint still on my hands, listening. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself love was shown in deeds, not words. But deep down, a question gnawed at me. Why wasn't it enough? Why wasn't I enough? Now, lying awake with my father's sentence still ringing in my ears, I finally saw the truth. It was never about the money, or the furniture, or the roof I had saved from collapse. It was about Ethan, the son who left but somehow never lost their devotion, and me, the daughter who stayed, who sacrificed but never truly belonged. That realization didn't crush me. It sharpened me. If they wanted me gone, they would learn what it meant to underestimate the one person who had carried this house on her back. That night, sleep never came. I lay in bed staring at the pale blue ceiling I had painted with my own hands, hearing my father's words again and again. 2 days to get your stuff out. Their cold certainty didn't just sting, it made me realize I couldn't wait for answers to fall into my lap. If they were pushing me out, there had to be more. The next morning, I called the only person I trusted completely. "Claire?" Lindsay's voice was warm but edged with concern. She'd known me since high school, sharp-witted, steady, now a lawyer who could see through half-truths like glass. I told her everything. The dinner, my father's ultimatum, Ethan's absence, yet his sudden inheritance. She listened without interruption, but when I paused, her tone shifted. "Something's off," she said. "People don't risk family peace without a reason. Claire, you need to find out if your name is tied to something, loans, accounts, paperwork. If they're hiding something, it's probably financial." Her words struck me like a match against stone. My parents had always been private about money, but after I saved the house 3 years ago, they had grown downright secretive. I hung up, my hands trembling, and scrolled through my phone until I found a number I hadn't used in months. Finn Walsh, a banker I'd worked with while designing a lobby for his Spokane branch. He was straightforward, and more importantly, he owed me a favor. When he answered, I didn't waste time. "Finn, it's Claire. I need your help. It's urgent," I explained the dinner, the ultimatum, Lindsay's suspicion. Silence stretched on the line before he said, "All right, I'll dig. But brace yourself." An hour later, my phone rang again. His voice was heavier this time. "Claire, there's a home equity loan, $60,000, taken out 6 months ago, and it's under your name." My blood ran cold. "My name?" "Yes, your social security number, and a signature. Looks close, but I've seen your real one. This isn't it. Your parents and Ethan are listed as co-borrowers, but you, Claire, you're the primary. If it defaults, you're the one responsible." The kitchen around me blurred. I gripped the counter until the edges bit into my palms. This wasn't just betrayal of trust. It was theft. Of my savings, my identity, my future. Finn emailed me the paperwork. I opened it, my breath short and uneven. There, in black and white, was my name, and below it, a signature that tried to mimic mine but faltered, the curve stiff, the tail of the N clipped too short. Rage rose in me, but then my eyes caught something else. Additional signatures, my father's bold scrawl, Ethan's careless scribble, and then, my mother's. I froze. My mother, the woman who sat silent at dinner, twisting her napkin, as though she were just a bystander. But she wasn't. She had signed. She had known. That realization hurt more than any forged signature. I could have believed it of my father, hard, pragmatic, willing to sacrifice anything for Ethan. I could have believed it of Ethan, always chasing quick wins no matter the cost. But my mother? The woman I had bought a television for so she could watch her cooking shows in comfort? The one I had replaced a washer for so she wouldn't have to carry laundry across town? She had chosen betrayal over honesty. The first cut had been favoritism. This was the second, deeper one, complicity. I stared at the document, my hands trembling. Shock gave way to grief. Grief hardened into fury, and fury sharpened into resolve. They thought I was weak. They thought I would pack my things and disappear quietly. They thought I would never fight back. They were wrong. If this revelation feels as shocking to you as it did to me, let me know your thoughts in the comments. And if you'd like to follow how this fight unfolds, make sure to subscribe, because the storm that came after this discovery was only beginning. I forwarded the files to Lindsay. Within minutes, she called back, her voice steady and firm. "Claire, this is identity theft, fraud. With the documents in your hands, we can take this to court, but you need more evidence. Every receipt, every bill you've paid for that house, gather it all." My eyes drifted around the kitchen I had remodeled, the granite counters I had saved for, the curtains I had chosen, the appliances I had bought. They weren't just memories. They were proof. For the first time in years, I felt something solid under my feet. Not love, not loyalty, but control. And I intended to hold on to it. By the next afternoon, I had made my choice. If my family thought they could erase me from the life I had built, then they would learn just how wrong they were. I would not leave quietly, and I would not leave empty-handed. I called a moving company first thing that morning. My voice was steady as I explained what needed to go. The gray sofa in the living room, the flat-screen TV mounted on the wall, the curtains I had carefully chosen, the washing machine in the laundry room, even the rug in the entryway. Every piece had been bought with my money, earned through long nights of work. They weren't gifts to my family. They were mine. By 2 o'clock, the truck rumbled into the driveway. 3 men in Navy uniforms stepped out and began dismantling the home I had poured myself into. The TV came down, the curtains folded, the washing machine hauled down the stairs. The once cozy living room soon looked barren, echoes bouncing off the walls where laughter and warmth used to live. Instead of grief, I felt a strange kind of calm. This wasn't loss. It was clarity. For years, I had been giving without question. Now, for the first time, I was taking back what belonged to me. As the movers worked, the doorbell rang. I opened the door to see Diane Burke, our neighbor from across the street. Her silver hair was neatly pinned back, and she carried a plate of cookies. But her eyes, sharp with concern, searched my face. "Claire, are you all right?" I saw the truck outside. I hesitated before answering. Dad told me to leave. So I'm leaving, but not without what's mine. Diane frowned, setting the plate on the counter. "I've watched you, year after year. Painting the porch, hauling furniture, fixing what no one else would. You gave this house its heartbeat, Claire. Not them." Her words landed heavier than the boxes being carried out the door. I swallowed hard, nodding. "Thank you, Diane. That means more than you know." She squeezed my hand gently. "Don't let them take your spirit with the furniture. You've got too much strength for that." Moments later, another figure appeared at the doorway. Henry King, from 2 houses down. Broad-shouldered in his flannel shirt, he wasn't a man of many words, but his presence alone carried weight. You need a hand with all this? He asked, glancing at the movers. I've got it covered, I replied, just reclaiming what's mine. Henry gave a slow nod. Good. About time, someone stood their ground. Their support, small but sincere, felt like a lifeline. For so long I had been invisible. Now, at least in their eyes, I wasn't. But the calm shattered within the hour. The front door swung open with a force that rattled the hinges. Ethan stormed in, his tie loose, his face flushed with anger. He dropped a suitcase to the floor, the sound echoing through the hollow house. What the hell is this? He barked, his eyes darting around the stripped living room. Where's the furniture? Where's everything? I stood my ground, arms crossed. I took what belongs to me. The sofa, the TV, the washer, the curtains, all of it. Mine. His jaw tightened. You don't get to decide that. Dad said this place is mine now. You're supposed to be gone. Your place? I snapped, stepping forward. Tell me, Ethan, what part of this house have you ever lifted a finger to save? Did you pay off the debt? Did you fix the roof? Did you buy a single thing in here? Number. But you had no problem signing my name to a loan, did you? His face flickered, just for a moment, with panic. Then he sneered. You're lying. You're just bitter. I pulled the folded papers from my bag and held them up. This is the loan agreement. My name forged, Dad's signature, yours and Mom's. The smirk drained from his face. His mouth opened, but no words came. Pathetic, I said, my voice low but steady. You needed me to save this house 3 years ago. You needed my name to get your loan when you failed in New York, and now you come crawling back, claiming what I built is yours. Ethan's hands clenched at his sides. He fumbled for his phone, dialing. Dad will deal with you. You'll regret this. Behind me, Henry stepped further into the room, his calm voice cutting through Ethan's rage. Careful how you speak, son. Claire's done more for this house than anyone else in it. We've all seen it. Ethan spun toward him, snarling. This doesn't concern you. Henry's gaze didn't waver. It does when I see someone being pushed around. Diane appeared in the doorway then, her eyes hard. Ethan, your sister has given more than you'll ever know. And this community sees it, even if your parents don't. For the first time, Ethan looked small. His bravado cracked, his eyes darting between the papers in my hand and the neighbors standing firm behind me. I took a step closer, the forged documents trembling slightly in my grasp, not from fear, but from resolve. You tell Dad, you tell Mom, you tell anyone you want. But hear me clearly, Ethan. Tomorrow, I'm filing a lawsuit. Identity theft, fraud, every crime you've committed against me, and this time, the judge, not Dad, will decide who's right. He froze, his lips pressed into a thin line. Without another word, he grabbed his suitcase, muttered something under his breath and stormed out, slamming the door so hard the windows rattled. Silence returned, heavy but different this time. Henry laid a hand on my shoulder. You did the right thing, he said softly. Diane nodded in agreement. And you're not alone, Claire. Don't ever forget that I exhaled slowly, my chest lighter than it had been in years. For the first time, I wasn't just defending myself. I was fighting back, and I wasn't finished yet. The night after Ethan stormed out, I packed the forged documents into a folder and drove straight to Lindsay's apartment. She had already cleared her dining table, laptop open, legal pads spread across the surface. Let's build your case, she said without hesitation. For hours, we sorted through receipts I had saved, proof of every dollar I had poured into the house, the invoice for the gray sofa, the delivery slip for the washer, even a credit card statement showing the chandelier I had hung above our dining table. Every page was another piece of evidence, a trail of sacrifices my parents had ignored. By midnight, Lindsay had drafted the complaint. Identity theft, fraud, financial damages. I signed it with a steady hand, my name bold and unshaken at the bottom of the page. The following morning, we filed it at the courthouse. The clerk's stamp landed on the papers with a heavy thud, a sound that felt like the closing of one chapter and the beginning of another. Within a week, my parents and Ethan were served. I could only imagine the looks on their faces when the sheriff's deputy handed them the documents. I didn't take pleasure in it, but I didn't feel guilt either. They had chosen this path. By early spring, the case was called to court. The small courtroom smelled faintly of polished wood and old carpet. I sat at the plaintiff's table beside Lindsay, my folder of documents stacked neatly in front of me. Across the aisle sat my parents and Ethan. My father's jaw was clenched, his eyes fixed straight ahead. My mother couldn't meet my gaze. Ethan slouched, his confidence wilted into nervous tapping on the table. The judge, an older man with silver hair and a steady voice, called the room to order. Lindsay rose first. She spoke with calm precision, laying out the story. My financial sacrifices, the $60,000 loan forged in my name, the signatures that didn't match my own, the co-borrowers who had knowingly tied me to a debt I never agreed to. One by one, she presented the receipts, the bank records, the statements Finn had provided. Then she called Diane. My neighbor stepped up to the witness stand, her voice firm as she described seeing me repaint the porch, hauling furniture, keeping the house alive. She carried that family on her back, Diane said. Everyone in our street knows it. Henry testified too, his deep voice unwavering. I saw Ethan barge into the house, angry, shouting that it was his. Claire stood her ground. She showed me the loan papers. I know what I saw. The defense tried to argue that I had consented to the loan, that I had been aware all along. But when the judge compared my genuine signature to the forged one, his expression hardened. Finally, it was Ethan's turn. He squirmed, stumbling through excuses. Dad said, "It was supposed to help. Claire doesn't understand. It wasn't a big deal." His words fell apart under the weight of evidence. When the judge spoke, his tone was clear and firm. The loan is void. The plaintiff's name is cleared. Damages are awarded to compensate for emotional distress and financial risk. The defendants, Mr. and Mrs. Dawson and their son Ethan, are liable for all court costs. The house, tied to the unpaid debt, is to be sold to settle with the bank. The gavel struck once, sharp and final. I didn't look back at my family as I left the courtroom. I didn't need to. Their silence was loud enough. Outside, the cold Spokane air bit at my cheeks, but for the first time in years, I breathed freely. Lindsay walked beside me, a rare smile tugging at her lips. "You won, Claire," she said quietly. "They can't touch you now." I nodded, though victory felt bittersweet. The house I had saved would be sold. My family ties were broken, but for the first time, justice had chosen me, and that was enough. Weeks passed after the trial, and the house that had once anchored me was gone. The bank foreclosed, strangers moved in, and the walls I had painted with my own hands were covered over with colors that weren't mine. For a moment, I thought losing it might shatter me, but instead, it set me free. I rented a small one-bedroom apartment near the Spokane River. Sunlight poured in through wide windows each morning, glinting off the water outside. It wasn't big, but it was mine. I placed the gray sofa by the window, set my old lamp in the corner, and hung navy blue curtains I had chosen for myself. Every piece I carried into that apartment wasn't just furniture, it was proof that I had taken my life back. My career began to grow in ways I hadn't dared to imagine. Clients started seeking me out, trusting my eye for design, and soon I was working on cafes, boutique lobbies, even a hotel project downtown. Each sketch I drew felt like another step forward, another reminder that I didn't need anyone else's approval to prove my worth. There were still moments of silence that cut deep, blocked numbers, unanswered calls, memories I couldn't erase. I knew my parents and Ethan were living in a cramped apartment, their pride gone, their reputation hollowed out. But for once, their choices were no longer mine to carry. My life was finally my own. Looking back, I understood the lesson I had needed all along. Love is not proven by how much pain you can endure for others. Loyalty is not measured by silence while people take advantage of you. True strength lies in knowing your worth and refusing to let even the people you love most walk all over you. And if you've ever had to draw that line, if you've ever had to stand tall against the very people you thought would protect you, you'll know how heavy that choice feels and how freeing it becomes. I'd love to hear your story too down in the comments. Maybe you'll find, like I did, that sharing it brings a kind of strength you didn't know you had. And if you'd like to hear more stories like mine, don't forget to like this video and subscribe. It's the way we keep these voices alive, together. I wasn't just the daughter who saved a house. I was Claire Dawson, independent, unbroken, and finally free.